Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to give another minute before we start for people to join. Okay, fantastic. Right, we'll make a start. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So today we're going to be talking about your biggest questions around hockey lighting. For those of you who've not been on one of our webinars before, just a little bit of basic webinar protocol. So everyone is muted apart from us, the presenters. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box. After the webinar, we'll send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording of the webinar so you can rewatch or share with any of your colleagues. And we'll also send out any of the resources that we mentioned during this session. So in today's session, we'll do some quick introductions first with our wonderful presenters. For those of you who don't know us, a little bit about Midstream Lighting. Then we're going to do a poll because we'd like to know a little bit about you and what you're trying to get out of today. Then we'll go into the main presentation where we look at, do LEDs really save us money? Do LEDs come on instantly? What's the cost of upgrading to LED, whether it be a retrofit project or a new build? What considerations you need to take when reusing masts and with electrical systems? When you will see a return on your investment with your LED upgrade? And is there any funding out there? And of course, at the end, we'll have time to answer some questions as well. So my name's Sophie and I'm your host today. And first up, we've got our presenter, Patrick. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. Hello, thank you for joining us today. So my name's Patrick. I'm the National Sales Manager for Sport at Midstream Lighting. I've been in the industry for over 10 years now, at Midstream for coming up to 4 years. And I look after all the sports projects, predominantly in the south from Birmingham down, while my colleague Sam Thompson looks after projects sort of north of that. My role here is to look at the best solution to meet the specific needs of each facility from the initial point of contact right through to completion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Patrick. And next up, Joe. Joe, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, all. Welcome to the webinar. My name's Jo Hawley. I am one of a small team of facilities development managers for England Hockey. My patch is the South, Southwest and South Central. As a team, we work to protect, improve and develop facilities across the whole of England, working with asset owning facilities, those that are run by leisure operators linked to local authorities, and also school owned sites to work with them to to address their facility needs. In the case of Midstream, we would be working with one of our customers or clubs to look at whether it's improving a facility linked to LED lighting and upgrading your existing system, or whether or not, in the case there's a new build pitch, looking and working with the customer at the end to make sure that it's got the right design and specifications to meet hockey's needs. So that's it from me. Thank you. I think it's now over to Simon Dowdy.
Over to you, Simon. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Sophie. Hi, everyone. It's my name's Simon Dowdy, and I am the other half of the Facility Development Management team. I look after the East Midlands, part of the Midlands and the East and the London regions. And between us, Joe and I also support the North. Thank you.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, thank you very much to all of our wonderful presenters today for being here with us. So for those of you who don't know us, we're Midstream Lighting. We're a full turnkey specialist LED lighting manufacturer and solutions provider. And we're specialists, not generalists. And by that, I mean that we make products and solutions just for our sectors. So sports being one of them. And we also work in the aviation and maritime sector. We design and manufacture all of our own products and solutions. We have a fantastic R&D team based in Italy, as well as many other offices around the world, including here in London. And we don't just manufacture our products, we offer the full solution. And that's everything from the lighting design right at the beginning of the project, through to maintenance, training, and really sharing our knowledge with our customers and our partners. And why we're here today is that we're very proud to be the official lighting partner of England and GB Hockey. And we've been working together for over 3 years now. And we've worked on over 30 projects over the UK. And we hope to do many more together. So first up, we've got the poll. We'd just like to know a little bit about you. In a moment, it should pop up on your screen. If you could just vote for which one's most applicable to you, please. I'll just give you 30 seconds to vote. Okay, fantastic. So as we expected, the majority of you have an older lighting system, so that's 75% of you. And we do have a couple of people who've already got LED floodlights. So now we're going to go into the main bit of the presentation. So first up, Patrick, could you tell us, will LEDs really save us money?
Thank you, Sophie. So you'll be pleased to hear yes, and let's have a look at some of the ways and why that is. So fundamentally, LEDs are a very different way of generating light compared to your traditional metal halide systems, which most of you on this call here today have. So what this means is there's far less energy required to generate the equivalent amount of light. Also, the light that is projected towards the area that we want is what you might hear or might have heard before, is more directional than older lighting systems. So illustrated on this slide here, you can see with older light systems that use a lamp, light is emitted in 360 degrees in every direction. So which also means that it's directing light away from where we want it, i.e. on the pitch. So illustrated by those black arrows. Where with LED, we can target that all the light that's being generated is focused onto the pitch and nowhere else. On top of that, so we're reducing. So what that means is there's less wastage, less CO2 emissions, and your energy running costs are also reduced. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Sophie. Other benefits include things such as warm-up time. So those of you that are familiar with turning the lights on, you may have to turn them on a good 20-30 minutes before you need to use them, just to get up to that full output. Whereas with LED, you're up to that full output instantly, so there's no need to turn them on early. Also, if you're you might find that you've got a couple of switches, so one switch will do one side of the pitch, another switch will do the other side, so you can't turn the lights on all in one go. You might have to wait 30 seconds before turning one side on from the other, so as to not overload the system. So again, with LED, there's no overloading, the system, so you can literally switch the lights all on instantly. The other thing is once you turn metal halides off, you can't then turn them back on straight away. And so what that means is often when you've got the lights on in an evening in the middle of winter, you turn them on at 4 p.m. when it starts getting dark, and we'll leave them on all the way till say 10 p.m. even if you've got a gap between bookings, because you can't turn them on straight away afterwards. Whereas again, with LED, you don't have that concern. So once if you do have a gap in bookings, you can simply turn them off when they're not being used, and know that you can turn them on straight away when required. Other benefits include with LEDs a longer lifespan, so there's fewer parts to fail. We haven't got any lamps, capacitors, igniters, that type of thing. Instead, you've got the fittings are made up of lots of hundreds of little LED units, which are more reliable and require less maintenance. What this means is that typically we're looking at paybacks between 3 and 5 years, depending on your existing setup, how many floodlights you've got, lighting spec, how often you use them, and your cost of your electricity. And then not only we've got the energy and cost saving benefits, we've also got the fact that the actual light itself is superior. So we can maintain those light levels for much longer. So with metal halide systems, when you first turn them on, within 100 hours or so, there would be quite a sharp drop off before they eventually, the lighting levels level out. Whereas with LED, you don't get that drop off. They can maintain their light levels for much longer. And then also, we touched on, because it's a more directional light, we can focus the light on the pitch and not on the surrounding area, which means we can control the light and there's less light spill ultimately. If we can move on to the next slide, please.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patrick. So next, are LED lighting solutions expensive?
So very much depends on the setup and what we're looking at. So when we look at LED installations, we typically characterize them into two groups, retrofits and new installs. If we start with retrofits, what we mean by retrofit is where there's a facility that has some existing lighting already, and we're trying to reuse as much of that existing infrastructure as possible, such as masts, brackets, electrics, cabling, controls. And so all we're doing is removing the old heads and gear and replacing them with LEDs instead. Then there'll be some testing and commissioning to make sure we're getting the light levels that we're designed against. So these projects tend to be much quicker and less upfront. Now, with your retrofit and lighting standards, we're typically looking at two levels. So your class 2, which is your 350 lux average, maintained average, and your class 1, which is that higher spec. So whereas the 350 lux system will be club level, which is what we typically look at, and the 500 lux is your sort of international premier competition level. So if we then look at the typical setups, so with hockey, we're looking at 8 masts. We will get the occasional 6 or 4 masts, but generally speaking, it's 8 masts, around about 50 meters high, so we get the light onto the infield. If the masts are in sensible locations, we've got good access to the heads. So if the masts are raise and lower type rather than statics, the brackets can be reused. The cabling is in good condition. The electrics are all good. Then we're looking more towards that 30,000 plus VAT and 40,000 plus VAT, depending on the class 2 or class 1 system. On the other hand, if the masts are set quite far back, so not in optimum locations, we will potentially need to use more fittings to get the same lighting spec. We need to maybe change the brackets, update the electrics there, maybe hire in expensive machinery such as cherry pickers to get access to the heads. Then we're starting to look at that higher end, so that 40k plus VAT or 54k for £54,000 plus VAT for the higher, depending on the spec. So in summary, we're looking at £30,000 to £40,000 for the 350 lux solution, and £40,000 to £54,000 for the 500 lux solution. Move on to the next slide, please.
Brilliant. So do we have to replace our masts, and do we need to get our facility rewired?
So this is a really good question. And it's one I get asked a lot, especially when I'm on site meeting clubs, etc. So start with the electrics. So generally speaking, when we're swapping over to LED, we talked about what we're doing is we're reducing the wattage, the power, and therefore the loading on the cables. So in the vast majority of cases, we can reuse them. Ideally, we'd also have sight of an up-to-date electrical installation condition report, which also help sort of firm that up and make sure we're up to British standards. But generally speaking, we don't normally have to touch the electrics or the cabling. The masts, the general rule here is as long as what we're replacing is smaller. So, and when I say smaller, I mean both in weight and in windage, so the size of the fitting, then we're going to be putting less strain on the masts and increasing their lifespan. So ideally we would have a data sheet, or it'll be on a mast that we're familiar with, so we've got an idea of the loadings, maybe some history or some maintenance history, etc., on the mast to help us. Failing that, there are structural tests that we can do to get some empirical data just to firm that up and support, so we know the definite where we stand with the masts and what they can support. Move on to the next slide.
Brilliant. And if we have no lights at all, what are the costs for a brand new install?
So yeah, so here, for facilities that have got no lighting, or maybe facilities that have lighting, but it has been condemned for some reason, too old or whatever. So here we've got a lot more things to consider, far more caveats and bigger ranges in cost. So here we need to obviously we've still got to allow for the fittings, but we've also got to allow for masts and associated groundworks. So what we mean by that are the foundations for the masts, trenching for new cabling as well. Then we've got the erecting of masts, the laying of the cables back to connecting back to a power supply, putting in some lighting controls, and then the testing and commissioning on top of that. Now, if we can locate those masts in optimal locations, there aren't any buildings in the way, there's no planning restrictions, no tree protection orders, that type of thing. If we can get good access to the mast, we're going to need some heavy plant or machinery to put the masts up. So as long as we can get good access for them, we've got a supply point that's within 20, 30, 40 meters of the pitch. Then we're looking at that 65, 75k plus that mark, depending on the lighting requirements. If, however, the masts, we have to set them a bit further back, not in optimal locations, so we need more fittings, maybe we need higher masts, so bigger masts. The supply point is much further away, so we need to have longer cable lengths. The trenching needs to be much greater, or the access for the plant is not great, so maybe we have to hand dig some trenches. We can't get the machinery in close enough, that type of thing. Then all of a sudden we're getting to that higher range. We're starting to get to that 95, 105,000 pounds for that, depending on the specification. So just to summarize that, 65 to 95,000 pounds plus that for the 350 lux class 2 system, 75 to 105,000 pounds for the 500 lux system.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paddy. So next, when will we see a return if we switch to LED?
So if we take all that information we discussed and sort of run through a typical example, if we look at a 8-mast system, then with reasonable, decent access, etc., we're looking at about £32,000 for the install of new LED lighting. Now, if we're replacing 22 kilowatt metal halides, you might find that on that metal halide system, you're spending £1,500 a year on average to get someone to carry out some regular maintenance. On top of that, you've got £1,000 a year on average on consumables such as your lamps, your capacitors, igniters, just to get them replaced. Then if you factor in the energy savings, so if we're reducing the wattage by 50%, if we assume that we've got 750 hours of use a year, your electricity costs are 35p per kilowatt hour, then you'll be looking to save over £5,000 a year just on electricity. And those numbers are fairly conservative as well. We've not pushed that. So if you factor all that in, for your £32,000 on updating LED, you're actually over 5 years, you'd have spent £37.5 if you kept with your original system. So that's where that payback within 5 years comes in. We can then move on to the next slide.
Yeah, brilliant, thanks. And can you give us an example from a real hockey club that's done this?
Yeah, so on the previous slide we looked at it as a hypothetical. Here we're looking at a real life example of a job we did a couple of years ago. So with this one, it's important to note that we actually increased the light levels. So this close to 400 lux. So this 397 lux on the slide here, this was actually the recorded levels after we did the testing. On top of that, the club increased their usage following our installation. So they added another men's and women's team to the site. And then on the telematics there at the bottom, that graph at the bottom, you can see a quite clear distinction in terms of the energy consumption from before they had metal halide to when they swapped over to LED, and they were getting a reduction as well as of close to 50% to 48% in this example, despite increasing lux levels and increasing the usage. And based on that, we're looking at a payback within 5 years. So I hope that's helpful. That brings me to the end of my bit. I'll hand you now back to Sophie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patrick. So next up, our question is, how can I raise funds for my club? So I'm going to hand this one over to Simon and Joe, please.
Lovely. Thanks, Sophie. So to start with, we thought that we'd give a very, very brief funding landscape update. And well, before I do that, I'd also say that we've got a fact sheet that we produced that Sophie will be able to pass out to everybody that's on the call. But within a funding landscape, traditionally we have always been reliant on Sport England for their funds. And for the last few years, that had been through a fund called the Community Asset Fund, which was a grant that clubs and associations could apply to. That disappeared, unfortunately, when COVID hit, and they froze that. And since then, we have been waiting to see whether there is any grants coming through from Sport England. Happily, they have just announced, or they will be announcing, a small grants fund, which will be up to £15,000, but that will be mainly for revenue funding rather than capital funding. So we're still waiting on Sport England to announce any capital funds that they may have. And we're hopeful that we may get some information relatively shortly, but that will be widely advertised as and when it comes through. What they do have, Sport England, is they have a partnership with crowdfunding. So if you are, whatever crowdfunding monies that you raise, Sport England will match fund them up to a level of £10,000. So it may not get you all the way, but it will certainly help with certainly some of your funding. Another area, so our major area of grant funding is now through local authorities. All local authorities have a fund which is either called a Section 106 or a CIL. So CIL stands for Community Infrastructure Levy. And these are charges that local authorities make to housing developments and developers. So if you haven't already made contact with local authority, either the leisure department or a funding department within your local authority, it's a really, really good idea to get any projects that you have noticed and let the local authority know about those, because they can then funnel appropriate funding into your projects. The other thing that local authorities have been administrating is carbon neutral funds. So carbon neutral funds, obviously focusing on sustainability, and again, a great idea just to contact your local council, have a look on their websites to see whether your council has, your local authority has any carbon neutral funds available. And I'll just pass over to Jo so she can just finish off the list.
Thank you, Simon. So one of the other areas where we've had clubs or facilities with some success around facility developments or improvement are linked to landfill companies like Veolia and Suez, who have a corporate social responsibility to invest money back into their local community. This pot isn't going to be for everybody, but very handy in terms of just to ensure that you don't waste time filling an application. Most of these sites actually do have postcode checkers, which range from 5 miles, 10 miles, 20-mile radius to in terms of if you're actually eligible to apply for any of that funding. There is also some money to be gained through wind farms as well, in the kind of the same kind of payback to local communities. There is a free grant search engine out there called Grantscape, which kind of collectively looks at some of these corporate social responsibility pots. So it might be worth, if you are kind of know of a recycling centre or a landfill that's near you, or a wind farm that's either is there or due to be built, it's certainly worth just spending 2 minutes and have a quick look at that to see whether or not you're eligible. The other area is commercial loans, whether that's through local high street banks in terms of trying to get money for capital investment, or through things like charitable banks. It's definitely now we're seeing a real trend in that's the way, if you don't have the finance there to be able to make the improvements or look at development, the landscape, as Simon's pointed out, there isn't loads of opportunities to gain huge amounts of money through grant applications. So very much working on the model that you take out a loan, you repay it over the course of the life, whether it's the upgrade of the lights or installation of a new pitch with lights on it. You obviously service the debt over that period of time, and then when it comes up to the end of it, you then resurface again. So again, lights can be incorporated into that model. There are a lot of other national governing bodies now that have loan schemes. So the LTA is one of them. The ECB has just recently launched one. We as an NGB are certainly exploring that avenue to be able to help and support clubs and facilities to improve or develop their facilities. So there's nothing yet available to kind of access, but we would like to think over the next 6 to 12 months, there will be something out there that may or may not, depending on your ability to service that debt. So you would need either some form of capital or security of tenure on that site to be able to service the loan, service the debt, sorry, then that might be an option for some facilities or clubs moving forward. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Again, Simon mentioned the funding landscape is very, very different to how it was 10 years ago. And many, if there are grants out there, many of the grants are set up to get you over the finishing line. So as Paddy said, and Patrick said, if your project is, retrofit of new lights, LED lighting, and you're looking at getting, 37,000 pounds, but you've only got 30, there are smaller pots of funding out there locally that you might be able to access to get you over the finishing line. The best route for those are through the active partnerships, which are county-based organisations which sit under the umbrella of Sport England. So they will be able to help you. Most of them have a link on their website, which will then draw down all the local funding pots. And then depending on what you're looking to apply for, it will then filter out. So there might be some opportunities there for smaller pots to get you to the final project cost. So it's a bit of a, funding is always very, very tricky. And I think it's very clear nowadays there isn't one solution or one pot that will literally, if you haven't got the funding, that will get you to that point. You have to be quite creative and certainly have a really broad network, as Simon alluded to earlier, around the local authority, about keeping your finger on the pulse about what's happening locally to your facility and site. Thank you, Sophie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much, Joe. So now we've got time for some questions. Let's have a look and see the questions we've got. So first up, we've got a question from Andrew. What is the typical lifespan of LEDs? Patrick, could you answer that one, please?
Yeah, of course. So if you look at your old metal halide system, if you had a decent lamp, you might get 5,000 hours out of it. With LEDs, we're looking at 10 times that. So it's much longer. On that, to that point, we offer a 10-year warranty as standard, purely on the basis that we don't limit that by the number of hours, just because we don't think you can use the fittings enough in that period to be able to exhaust the LEDs.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patrick. Our next question is from David. David says, we are looking to upgrade. Chat has been leaning towards 350 lux levels, but ambition is to hold higher level games, etc. in the future. So talk is also looking at 500 lux. Other factors looking at 500 lux would be if it would take longer to degrade to 350 lux or acceptable levels. Would the initial outlay of the extra money be beneficial regarding this, as the interval between renewing a system would be longer? Our present system is over 30 years old. Wow. Patrick?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot to digest and take on there.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll take some of the points and we can maybe have a longer conversation outside the webinar. But I mean, yeah, so there's things. First of all, there's considerations about the MAS and whether they will support a 500 lux system. If I don't know if you've got a 500 lux system already, but if you have, the chances are it can. If it doesn't, then we might need to just do some testing on the master check. You can increase it to 500 lux. There's also options in terms of, which we didn't discuss or cover on this webinar, about controls. So although you can put in the 500 lux system, the chances are you won't need that 500 lux system the whole of the time. So if you like the idea of a 500 lux system and have the budget for it, great. But if you want to put in a control system, we can dim it down to 350 lux. So you're still getting the cost benefit, the energy saving of the 350 lux, but also you have the option of increasing to 500 lux for those moments that you need it. So hopefully that covers broadly what you were after there. But like I say, maybe outside this webinar we'll have a more in-depth conversation, and it will probably involve having to go on site to answer that question fully.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, as Paddy says, David, we'll follow up with you in an email afterwards, and Paddy will be happy to answer any more questions you've got. Our next question.
Sorry, is it worth me just coming in to say what England Hockey's
Sure.
standards are, just on the back of that one, because it's quite relevant.
Yeah,
So for those that are on the call, obviously, David knows his lux levels, so that's really, really helpful. I think for those that are on the call, from an England Hockey point of view, 350 lux is certainly suitable for training, match play, competitions, while 500 lux can be explored for higher level, non-televised, like National League or international competitions. So yeah, and I think for anybody who's working or is based on a site where other sports take place on that facility. So most of the hockey facilities do have a little bit of football. It's very, very it's really key for you if there is a discussion going on, if you're from a club, just to make sure you touch base with that leisure provider, the facility operator, or the asset owner, just to ensure that you do get the right minimum lux levels for hockey, which in this case is 350. But as Paddy's pointed out, there is a capability then. So for football, it's 200 lux. But what we wouldn't want to see is 200 lux being the precedent for setting the precedent for that site. And that obviously is then not compatible with hockey play due to the speed of the ball and the size of the ball. So really, really key to make sure that you get the minimum 350 in place. But there's no reason why it can't be 5. It's just a price point more than anything.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Joe. That's really helpful. So we've just got time for one more question, and anything else we'll follow up in an email with. Our next question is, how high should masts be for hockey pitches? Paddy, if you can answer that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it depends on the location. I think we touched on it briefly in the web. So it depends on the location, number of masts, etc. So typically we're looking at 50 meters. So and 8, so 4 down each side in terms of quantity. That said, there are cases where we've done it on 6 at 50 meters. Any less than that, we're starting to want to increase the mast height, or if the mast spacings are quite far from the back, we might have to, far from the pitch, we might have to increase that to 18. Also, we've had examples where we've done it on, say, 13.5 meters, and it still complies. It's just not quite as optimum as a 15-meter mast.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know I said that was the last question, but we've just had a good one come in, so I'm just going to squeeze in one more. So we've got a question from Jack. He asks, what is the maintenance schedule for LEDs? If you wouldn't mind answering that one, Paddy.
Yeah, so this is very much tailored to the individual. So we've got examples of clubs that just want their LEDs and aren't too interested in a maintenance package. Now that 10-year warranty that we've mentioned before, that's regardless of whether you take a maintenance package. That having said all of that, it is still a good idea to take a maintenance package in order to get the most out of your LED. So in terms of firstly the lifespan of the LEDs, but also in terms of maintaining the maximum outlight levels on the pitch. And typically with LEDs, it's not normally necessary to do one every year, maybe one every other year. So biannual main inspection, give it a check over, give it a clean, give it a test, that type of thing. Hopefully that. But ultimately we tailor it for you.
I'm just going to piggyback onto that. Sorry, Sophie. I'm conscious of time as well. From an England hockey point of view, any especially new developments that we would be involved in or would advise on, we would definitely recommend as part of the business model for that facility, there is a maintenance program built in along with biannual light checks, just to ensure that you are obviously playing under optimum lighting to ensure that you've got a safe environment to play hockey. So I think it's really, really key that as part of any business model that you're doing, then the light check and any maintenance program could be factored in terms of the overarching costs. That would be helpful. Simon and I, probably there is definitely a trend in the number of inquiries we get on a yearly basis, and they're definitely, as I'm sure Patrick and Sophie will agree from their side of the business as well, that we get a spike on sports facilities normally in August time, August beginning of September, pre-season training. The days are getting shorter, nights are getting longer, and everybody just assumes that the lights are going to be okay because they were at the end of the season or haven't been used as much since the end of the season. And that's where we see a real spike in inquiries about help. Can you know, what can we do? So many fittings have either broken or we need bulbs replacing. So I think it's definitely the maintenance side of it really helps clubs and facilities get on the front foot. So there is no delay or no lost time on, you know, accessing provision on your site. So it's definitely a good thing to factor in if you can.
Okay, fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to call it time now. Thank you very much for giving up your time to watch us today. And we hope that we've answered some of your questions. As I said, any questions we didn't get to today, we will follow up with in the email, and the recording will come out later. In the meantime, if there's anything you want to ask that you didn't get a chance to, our details are up on the screen now. Please feel free to email us, or you can reply to my email a little bit later with the recording. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our attendees, and thank you to our fabulous panelists today. It's been great having you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.